Welcome, everyone. Today we are here for the Resist NATO 2024 recap. The people resisted, the fight continues. And here today we are going to talk about how the months-long effort of the Resist NATO campaign happened and the result of this campaign. I could ask kindly to you to use the chat box and introduce yourself, your name, your organization, and where you are from. And we are going to have an interactive, basically, meeting today. And we are also still people are joining to the meeting at the moment, but we could start. Maybe we can go to the next slide. Yes, the Resist NATO campaign started, as I said, months ago, officially in the January 2025. And since then, there has been a build-up events for the People's Summit and the mobilization that happened in The Hague during the NATO summit this year. And in your screen, you can see some nice photos from the People's Summit and the mobilization. We will see nicer photos and the videos later, and we are going to learn more about what happened in The Hague. And also, we are going to talk about what will happen the next for the Resist NATO campaign. Because this war machine, this imperialist North Atlantic terrorist organization continue to exist, and our struggle will continue to exist. And we're going to talk about what we're going to do after this campaign, how the campaign will continue, basically. But before then, I would like to talk about how it started. We could go to the next slide. Yes, the Resist NATO campaign in 2025 started with the points of unity. And with these points of unity, the organizations from Europe and all over the world united for the cause of fighting against imperialism. We had 9 points of points of unity, basically, the Resist NATO campaign. And these points are address the aggression, basis, militarization, and wars caused by US-NATO alliance. And also, these points point out the importance of advancing people's struggle for peace and liberation. I'm not going to go through all the points, but just mentioning few of them maybe would be good. For example, the first point was we oppose NATO as a US-led military alliance that is a prime actor in imperialist and proxy wars of aggression, military occupation, and environmental destruction and ensuing climate crises, resulting in the deaths and displacement of millions of people. We could go to the next slide, maybe. Another important point in our points of unity was how NATO was expanding beyond its members. And we addressed that in the points of point 5, actually, and which says, we oppose NATO's collaboration with non-member states through partnership programs such as Mediterranean Dialogue, Partnership for Peace, Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, and other frameworks that include governments such as the Zionist government of Israel with records of systemic violence, human rights abuses, and genocide. We could go to the next slide, maybe. And again, as I mentioned, beyond the talking about US-NATO aggression, bases, militarization, and war, we also talked about the importance of the national liberation and self-determination. And I would like to talk about, read the point 7, actually, for that. We support the rights of people and nations to self-determination and sovereignty, the exercise of their fundamental rights and freedom, and their right to resistance against imperialist aggression. Yes, you could find these points of unity in our website, which we will share in the end of this program. And it's basically in the website of the International People's Platform. But again, as I mentioned, we will share that. Maybe we could go to next slide. Yes, in the beginning, we divided the phases of the campaign to the three. First phase was the preparatory phase. Second was People's Summit and the protest action, basically the what happened in the June in The Hague. And the third phase was the post-event phase, basically right now, what we are doing. We are going to talk about the next steps. As I mentioned, this will be one of the more important part in our webinar. And maybe we could go to the next slide. Yes, and the structure of the Resist NATO Europe, shortly to mention, made from the network members. The network members is comprised of the more than 500 organizations and individuals who agreed on the points of unity that I mentioned before. And there is a steering committee, which I will talk about the steering committee in the next slide. It is the committee that provides day-to-day leadership and oversight of the implementation of the campaign. And of course, there was working committees where all network members could join and basically make the Resist NATO campaign happen. And those working committees were information and education, social media, communication and outreach, and summit and protest action committee, along with its subcommittees. In the next slide, I will talk about the steering committee members. Yes, steering committee members are made from organizations who initially and during the process who expressed their interest to be part of this committee. And these organizations were International League of People's Struggle, Global Women for Peace United Against NATO, International Women's Alliance, United Nations Anti-War Coalition, Resist US-led War Movement, Veto Coalition from Netherlands, Confederation of Workers from Turkey in Europe, Observation Against the Militarization of Schools and Universities, Friends of the Filipino People in Struggle, Anakbayan UK, ALPAS, and Union of Cypriots. Representatives from these organizations was forming the steering committee during these months in the preparation for the Resist NATO campaign. Without making this introduction part longer, I will go to the political situational part, which Carly and Rhonda from the Resist US-led War Movement will share with us the political situation. Carly, Rhonda.
Thank you, Oz. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm Rhonda Ramiro with the Resist US-led War Movement. We were honored to be part of the steering committee and part of this campaign, and we're part of the steering committee for the Resist NATO campaign in the United States last year as well. It's looking like this will become a very powerful campaign and tradition. Whenever NATO meets, the people will also be there to protest. So political situation, or what made us decide to launch this campaign and form a coalition against NATO? Well, as we know, NATO is one of the biggest arms of US-led war in the world. It is, from the very beginning, has been and continues to be a war-making coalition. It's not about defense. It's all about making war. And while that was the case before the summit this year, it remains the case now. So at the summit this year, what actually took place? NATO reconfirmed many of the things that it was already committed to before this year's summit, which includes spending for more war, fomenting and pushing its members to be more militaristic, and taking stands which actually promote more war in the world. So the NATO members came out with a declaration at the very end, which really articulated its commitment to continuing on to be that tool of US-led war in the world. First of all, they committed to this 5% increase, or I'm sorry, a 5% commitment of the GDP of all of their members to what's called defense and I think actually this slide may be slightly in the wrong order, but I think it's okay. They they agreed to a 5%, a commitment of 5% of their budgets, all the members, to defense and security related expenses. So last year they committed to 2% of their GDP to be spent on defense and security related expenses, or in other words, military spending. This year, it more than doubled at a time when the people of the world and the people of all of the countries in NATO are actually experiencing extreme poverty, cutbacks to social services, reductions in their wages, cutbacks to their pensions. All of those things are happening while the governments are now pledging to spend more than twice as much of their gross domestic product on the military. The majority of this budget is going to be spent on what they call core defense requirements, which they defined as the armed forces, stockpiling of weapons, military operations and missions, research and development, operation of military commands, modernization of their arsenals as if they need to do that, and more. So, you know, as this slide says, who wins big when there's a commitment to this increase in the spending on the military? It's the war-making industries, the weapons corporations, the corporations that manufacture not only weapons, but intelligence gathering, technology, high-tech corporations that contribute the computers and the chips to make these weapons work. These are the big winners in this NATO summit. And, you know, it really was no surprise to us that NATO came out with such a declaration, given the NATO summit was conducted part and parcel with economic or convening of CEOs who are part of that defense industry. So the Defense Industry Forum, which was conducted right before the NATO summit happened, attended by heads of state, defense ministers, the CEOs of the weapons and war-making corporations, held a convening where the Secretary General of NATO, Rutte, said, we must spend more to prevent war. We must win this new war of production. That's what this summit is all about. So laying it out very boldly and very barely that the NATO and its members will continue to use its same strategy, pour more money into making war and not truly preventing it. It's a peace that's not about actual peace. It's about making money for war industry so that they can preserve the same system that got us into this crisis to begin with. So at that summit, they also mapped out ways that they could increase defense. So putting more money into air defense, missiles, planes, etc., drones, investing in more tanks, producing more ammunition, and then what they call innovating and harnessing the potential of space. So even launching more of its war-making capability into space. If we can have the next slide, please. Okay. So this kind of goes into a little bit more the commitment of the 5% of the GDP to defense-related expenses. So I talked about the 3.5% going toward sort of the hard equipment, so to speak. The rest of it, 1.5% of this spending, is supposed to be allocated to infrastructure, innovation, and strengthening the defense industrial base. So they try to sugarcoat it to make it sound as if they're going to be helping the NATO countries invest in their infrastructure to make things more stable, to bring more jobs to the countries. But really, this is saying that they're going to be allocating this money to infrastructure that helps to facilitate war. And it means also they're investing in things like mining to extract, minerals and so forth that go into the production of weapons. So it's about easing up the supply chain or all the points on the supply chain to support the war industry. If we can have the next slide. And then another major outcome of the NATO summit is that they explicitly stated their support to continue funding the proxy war, the US and NATO proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. So leading up to the summit, there was much protest by people in the member countries and even some of the members of parliament opposing continued funding of the war in Ukraine, seeing it as really it's a failed war. Ukraine can't win unless, billions more dollars are poured into supporting it through weapons. And the people also, we recognize that that money is coming from what should be spent on the people's needs. But the members of NATO cowed to pressure and agreed to continue supporting this war effort in Ukraine, and specifically would be directing their funds into more arms, of course, but also into Ukraine's defense industry. So, meaning that they would also be putting money or giving aid to Ukraine so that it could invest in its own defense industry. But the irony of it, or the not so veiled reality of it, is that they're actually trying to invest in more weapons production, which would then come back around full circle and benefit the war makers, and specifically Ukraine's drone industry, which has been known, to be already a prolific industry and one of the top producers of drones in the world. So the situation, as we see it with NATO, is that while there may have been some questions prior to the summit about the U.S. pulling out, about European countries, everybody abandoning NATO, it may not continue. They held it together enough and doubled down on their previous strategy of increasing funding for the war making that would be taken up by the members of NATO. But what does this mean for the people? The political situation isn't just about the war makers, but it's also about the people and how people are impacted and how people are rising up. For that, I want to turn it over to Carly, also with the Resist US-led War movement.
Thanks, Rhonda. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Carly with Resist US-led War movement. And Rhonda really laid it out. While the NATO heads of state were buckling to the dictates of Trump, and Ruta was bending over backwards to text Trump, congratulate him, beg for more US intervention. We know that this investment in the destructive war industry, instead of pro-people industry, and instead of a genuine security, what they're building up will only elongate the prolonged war in Ukraine. It will only continue to fuel the genocide in Palestine and the aggression of Zionism in all of West Asia. While we were at the summit, the US intervened and bombed Iran. So our protest there was also aligned with mass protests all over the world and mobilizations where people were calling for the US to get its hands off of Iran. We know that in this increasing and expansion of the European defense industry, all of the NATO spending will also go to fuel the weapons corporations that are responsible for the attacks on Palestine, where Palestinians displaced by the genocide and occupation are facing a famine, are being slaughtered at food distribution sites. Um, and it's a situation where you can imagine an entire classroom of children, at least 28 children every day, being killed by the US-backed Zionist entity. And so this crisis of war that the people are living through every day is just being funded further by the imperialists. And this is happening in the context of the NATO countries where there are shrinking funds for social services, where public services are being cut. And while the whole apparatus around the world is fueling state repression on the people. In the US, where people are being arrested for supporting Palestine, where migrants are being detained, and a fascist state is cracking down on the people. But we know that the only solution, as long as NATO exists, as long as the conditions for war exist, the only solution is for the people to resist NATO and fight for a just and lasting peace. Because it won't be NATO or Trump, although they pretend to be peacemakers, that will bring peace. It will be the people in struggle. So yeah, as we saw with this campaign, um, there's several fronts where we can resist NATO, and some tactics that we can consider future campaigns to include. So this was represented, and you'll hear a lot more about it in the summary of our People's Summit and mass mobilizations. But a few points to keep in mind. For us, it was key to emphasize that it really is the national liberation struggles around the world who are leading the way in resisting NATO and US imperialism. So in the summit, we heard from liberation movements from Palestine to Cyprus to the Philippines to Kenya. We heard from youth and students who are fighting back against neoliberal education systems that cooperate with and fund the genocide, and had a convergence of many young people who are inspired by these liberation struggles and building solidarity. We heard from movements across Europe that are directly fighting against NATO bases and US bases, from Leeuwarden to Lakenheath and Florence, where people are confronting these bases and NATO exercises head on, to the entire workers' movement that is protesting these austerity conditions, that's fighting against wage cuts and fighting against staffing shortages and rising costs of living, which are part of the crisis that this war investment is causing. So there were, just the last few months, there were massive workers' strikes in London and Luxembourg and Paris and Brussels. And then workers even mobilizing to shut down the war machine and its supply chain itself, from port shutdowns in Italy to Spain, and around the world. It's really the people who have the power to paralyze the war machine. So our future campaigns and our efforts to wrap up this situation are, our situation should always point toward action. Our campaigns against NATO can help to forge this united front, with peace movements in the imperialist countries linked arm in arm with national liberation movements in the semi-colonies, and the workers around the world who, when they're organized and mobilized consciously in the fight against fascism and war, can shut down the whole war machine. So yeah, I'll pass it back to the MCs, and we can continue to resist NATO and fight back.
Thank you very much, Rhonda and Carly from Resist US-led war movement. With the political situation, we learned that, and we know that NATO is continuing to spread terror all around the world. And it was underlined that importance of being united and raising international solidarity and resisting NATO. Right now, we are going to talk about what happened in The Hague last month. And for the first part of this what happened there. We are gonna talk with Alexis from Union of Cypriots and Alessandra from Observatory Against Militarization of Schools and Universities. Yes, Alexis, Alessandra.
Thank you, Oz. I'm Alexi. I'm from the Union of Cypriots, and I was also co-leading the Education and Information Committee of Resist NATO. And I'm going to talk a bit about the work we did building up to the summit in June. So, in order to arouse interest in the summit and to spread information regarding NATO and its belligerent activities, the Education and Information Committee organized 4 webinars, as you can see here. The first one, NATO expansion and the Russia-Ukraine war, which took place in February, talked about NATO's role as a destabilizing force against the Soviet Union as well as Russia, from its inception in 1949 until today. The events that led to Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine in 2022, with a focus on the developments between 1990 with the fall of the Soviet Union and NATO's expansion to the east thereafter. The second webinar, NATO and the Rise of the Far Right, which took place in April, shined a light on NATO and its role in facilitating far-right movements from its inception within Europe through its Stay Behind networks, as well as outside of Europe with its support of counterinsurgency movements. We also talked about the rise of the far right and its governments in Europe, their need for ever-increasing militarization, as well as the austerity that follows it for the working people. The third webinar, which took place in May, NATO military base expansion around the world, gave a detailed insight into NATO bases around the world and how they are expanding at a worrying rate. Speakers from different organizations from around the world joined us and gave us a look into their particular struggle against NATO and militarization. And last but definitely not least, the fourth and final webinar, Schools Under Fire, NATO, Militarization, and Student Resistance, which took place in June, gave an insight on the history of resistance on student campuses and its violent repression, starting from anti-war encampments against the US bombing of Vietnam, as well as concrete examples from today, including an input from a student activist from the Gaza encampments in Amsterdam. The average number of registrations for all 4 webinars was 163. The average number of participants was 100, which gives an average participation rate of 63.75%. And the total number of participants for all webinars was 398. So if you can go to the next slide, please. As I mentioned before, we were lucky enough to have guest speakers from many different organizations around the world fighting their own struggles against NATO imperialism, all united in the fight against NATO and imperialism. So I just wanted to give a big thank you to all of the different organizations and folks around the world that joined us in our journey and gave us an insight into their particular struggle. We learned a lot of valuable information, which contributed to increasing international solidarity, as well as allowing us to think about how to implement all this information towards our own unique but united struggles. Next slide, please. So what you will see here is a short clip from our first webinar, which took place in February, NATO expansion and the Russia-Ukraine war.
It's showing that our unity is stronger than theirs ever will be. They are divided on this issue on Ukraine, but they are not divided on maintaining imperialism and gearing up for more world war. So even though it looks like NATO is disagreeing with itself now about Ukraine, there are other much more catastrophic wars on the horizon that NATO is united on keeping the pace towards. And we, as a global peace movement, need to be ready for this and to fight against it. Take advantage of these splits. Again, we are more united than NATO and the imperialists ever will be. For second,
Okay, you can stop it now. And I will now hand it over to Alessandra.
Hi everyone, I'm Alessandra from Italy. I am a member of the CUB, which is a grassroots Italian trade union, and I'm also a member of the Observatory Against the Militarization of Schools and University. I just would like to point out that this last organization I mentioned is very important because we shouldn't forget that militarization starts from education. The militarization of the minds and the idea that war must be normalized starts from the education from a very young age to university with research done to support the military industry. In this short clip, you will see something about the second webinar we organized, which was the NATO military base expansion around the world, which took place in May.
So the revolution in the Philippines is one of the longest running liberation struggles in the world. It has been undefeated for more than 5 decades already. And like I said, it's really a significant threat to US imperialism as it is consolidating more and more political power. Because basically it's taking away this very important semi-colony of the US. As Jania has already mentioned as well before, it's a very strategic point for the US. So a liberated Philippines would really mean a huge blow to US imperialism. And it's also currently one of the key deterrents why the US is not able to already use the country more and more as a launch pad for its war against China. So when we look at it at this context, it becomes also a very important struggle for us as anti-imperialists to connect with and to support, because our support to the Philippine Revolution becomes a very integral part of the anti-imperialist worldwide movement.
Okay, thank you. And the next clip is about the webinar that took place in June. As Alexi already said, it was a webinar about the militarization of schools and the student resistance. The title was School Under Fire, NATO Militarization and Student Resistance.
No? Okay, so I guess we have to skip it. Sorry, Alessandra.
No problem. Okay. We also there were also, as a build-up activities, other webinars where members of Resist NATO also co-organized or participated in other webinars of other organizations. As you can see, like NATO Not Wanted in Latin America, organized by GWAN, Global Women for Peace United Against NATO, and then NATO Out of Leeuwarden, organized by Resist NATO, the Geen Ruimte voor Defensie, Resist US-led war movement, Veto and Veto. And then Resist NATO Dayton, mobilized against the NATO Parliamentary Summit this May, organized by Resist NATO Dayton, and ILPS US. And from south to north, uniting our struggles against the imperialist war machine, organized by ALPAS Filipinas, ILPS Germany, and Resist NATO. And then Europe's complicity in US-led militarism in the Philippines, organized by FFPS, Friends of the Filipino People in Struggle. And then I think this section is ended.
We still have this one, but I can do this one. So this
Sorry.
is, oops. Okay, so yeah, other than the webinars, comrades from the committee also attended protests against NATO, like the anti-SICO conference, which took place in February in Munich, as well as on Women's Day on the 8th of March in Berlin, as well as many different workshops that took place around Europe. So, yeah, I think that's all for the build-up activities. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Alexis, and thank you very much, Alessandra. During these months, after the launch in January, Resist NATO campaign initiated and supported many activities online, in person, and in hybrid. And Alexis and Alessandra, thank you for sharing all those events. You can find all the webinars, either the ones that we initiated or that we supported, in the website of the Resist NATO campaign, which is shared in the chat box. Also, some materials you will find on the website, the Resist NATO's campaign materials, photos as well, also information about this year's Resist NATO campaign and the previous years. As Rhonda mentioned, Resist NATO campaign actually started in 2024 during the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. And right now, we'll go to the next part, which Andrea from ILPS and Angie from CSRP will talk about what happened in The Hague, the People's Summit and the mobilization. They will share the photos, videos, and the lots of information, the exciting part of our webinar. Andrea, Angie, we are with you.
Yes. Thank you very much, Oz, and good evening, everyone. So I'm Andrea, and I was part of the steering committee for the People's Summit and the protest action. And we were involved in the running of the program for the day. So finally, after about nearly 10 months of preparations, and as you've also heard, like, you know, the sharing of other friends here and comrades about all the preparations that went into the summit to build up, you know, interest for it and organize and mobilize people. So we finally were able to have the People's Summit on the 21st of June. And then on the 22nd, the protest mobilization happened in The Hague. So the idea of the summit was really to bring in all of these voices of dissent, of resistance against NATO, you know, so that we could have visibility and a presence and a voice in terms of the narratives that were coming out of the NATO summit in The Hague, the official summit. And we were able to bring 168 people from 23 countries to join the People's Summit on the 21st of June. And with our own online and live platforms during the day, we were able to bring in more people, and over 600 people altogether joined us physically, but also online as well. And they were able to, to join and experience the process. So that is just a picture of the crowd that we had there, a very enthusiastic crowd. So next slide, please. So the program of the day, in the morning, it started out with keynote speakers, and we had two plenary sessions. The first plenary session talked about U.S.-NATO aggression, bases, militarization, plunder, and war. And the second plenary session talked about advancing and supporting people's struggles for peace and liberation. On the second part of the program in the afternoon, after lunch, we had two sets of workshops. And you can see the workshops that we have here. The first workshop, were on the student and youth rising, building solidarity with the Filipino people's struggle for peace and liberation, organizing women against war and for just peace, cultural workers against art washing. And the second part, the next slide, please. The second workshops were on Palestine, on military spending and social austerity measures, on defying rising militarism and fascism in Europe and the world. After the workshops, we had time for the different groups to report back on the workshops, and it was a very important discussion as part of the workshop, all the workshops, to talk about what next, because we really wanted to, continue the momentum and of the initiative that we have started, and also in preparation for the next NATO summit, which in 2026, which will be held in Turkey. And then after the report back from the workshops, we had the acclamation and the presentation of the unity statement. The unity statement, you can find it on the website. And as of the moment, there are 32 signatories of organizations to the unity statement, and we are continuing to promote this and hope that more organizations will also sign the unity statement. And the People Summit ended up with a lot of singing, with a lot of chanting, and with a very, very high energy from participants who came to join us on that day. So the next slide, please. So I'll just go through, some of the people, the speakers who were with us for the keynotes, the plenary, and the plenary speakers. Our keynote speaker was Victor Garces, and he is with the Institute of Political Economy in Brussels, and he is also the current vice chairperson of the International League of People Struggled. And he is the founder of several global networks like Resist US-led Wars and People Over Profit, among others. So Victor Garces laid out, the context of the importance of the People's Summit, and juxtaposing it to the NATO summit that would transpire like 2 days after the People's Summit. The political situationer that was earlier shared by Rhonda and Carly is really the summation of, the whole context of the significance of the People's Summit in all of what was happening in the Netherlands at that time. We were also very honored. Next slide, please. We were also very honored to receive and read a solidarity message from the head of mission of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela to the European Union, His Excellency Ambassador Jorge Valero Briceño, who shared with us the Venezuelan people's valiant and heroic resistance against the unrelenting onslaught of US imperialism. Next slide, please. And the first plenary sessions, we had speakers speaking to the first theme, which was the US wars of aggression. And we had a panel of speakers that included Asra Sayed from Pakistan, who is a political activist, a feminist, and an academic, and who is also known for her advocacy on issues related to the rights of marginalized communities, women, landless peasants, and farmers. She is also the founder and executive director of Roots for Equity, a grassroots organization based in Karachi that works on political, economic, social, and environmental justice. And Asra has also served as the chairperson of the International Women's Alliance and the Asia Pacific Forum on Women, Law, and Development in various capacities since 1999. The picture that you see here is a picture of one of the plenary speakers, one of the speakers on the second plenary, and from Palestine. So if you could move to the next slide, please, so I can introduce the other speakers. So this was the lineup of the first panel of speakers. From Asra is sitting second from the right. And then next to her, on her right, was Chris de Ploeg, who is a grassroots organizer, journalist, and author of books on Ukraine and colonialism, and he is based in the Netherlands. Chris is also a political policy officer for the Anti-Colonial Socialist Party here in the Netherlands. And Sunny Africa, of course, a Filipino economist and social activist who is the executive director of Ibon Foundation and spoke about the situation in the Philippines and the expansion of U.S. presence, especially with regards to its pivot policy of pivot to Asia. So next slide, please. And then the second set of speakers, of panel speakers came from people's organizations and movements advancing struggles for just and lasting peace and liberation. We had speakers representing the struggles of island peoples and nations, Kanaki, SMK, we in the Reunion Islands, and then the first picture that you saw earlier of Dr. Wael El Zere of the Palestine Land Study Center. We also had Kiritu Shege of the Revolutionary Youth League, who shared the inspiring struggles of the youth and the Kenyan people. And finally, we had our final speaker, Connie Ledesma, who was a member of, and this is her picture, was a member of the people for of the National Democratic Front of the Philippines peace negotiating panel, and representing the ongoing struggle of the Filipino people for self-determination and national liberation. And before she spoke, we had a minute of silence to honor the memory of her husband, who is also part of the national liberation struggle in the Philippines, who had recently passed away. Next slide, please. So I will pass you on now to Angie, who will inform you about the experience of the workshops and what transpired during the workshops, especially about what next. Thank you very much, Angie from CSRP in France.
Hi, yes. Hello, everybody. I'm Angie, and I'm going to be very quickly going into like kind of what we talked about in the different workshops. So as Andrea said, after a morning of conferences, the afternoon was much more participative. Everybody was able to pick out 2 of the 7 workshops that were held throughout the afternoon on different topics related to US-led war and militarism. And as you're going to see, the workshops are organized by like a variety of different organizations that were part of the Resist NATO campaign. And that really shows us how the summit served to bring together a lot of different progressive organizations and allowed us to learn about the conditions and resistance strategies that are used worldwide. So the first one, as you can see, is on student and youth rising. This workshop was organized by Anagbayan UK and by the Student Coalition Berlin. It was a very popular workshop amongst the youth, of course, but not only. And the key takeaway, kind of, as you can see here in this quote, by Norwin is that there's really a surge in youth movement and youth agitation. But in order for this movement kind of to be successful, they also need to link up with other sectors of society, specifically the workers' movement. Next slide, please. The second workshop, thank you. The second workshop was organized by FFPS, mainly, but also by ILPS and NDF, because we got an introduction by Kai Victor from ILPS to talk about kind of the US and Europe's pivot to Asia and the Indo-Pacific strategy around it, and had a comment from the NDF to talk about the specific role, as you can see on the right, of the Philippines in this context and the Philippine Revolution. And then this workshop kind of went to go into the details of what are the different ways in which we can enact solidarity, concrete political solidarity with the Philippine Revolution. And yeah, there were different breakout groups on specific themes and ways to do that, but I'm going to move on because we don't have that much time left. But you will, yeah, there will be at the end, there's going to be shared soon resolutions, concrete resolutions coming out of each workshop that are going to be on the website of Resist NATO. So you'll be able to go and to see the details really of what went on in these workshops. But for now, let's move on. The third workshop, if we can go to the next slide, please, was Organizing Women Against War and for Just Peace. This workshop was organized by IWA, which is International Women's Alliance, and GWAN, which is Global Women United Against NATO. And this one has really discussed how women's rights are being used to further imperialist expansion, such as the women, peace and security agenda pushed by the UN. And so we talked about how women are affected by imperialist warmongering in the global south and in the global north in different ways, and how we need to really unite and resist NATO. So now moving on to the fourth one, which was centered on cultural workers against art washing. Exactly. This workshop talked about what is art washing, how are progressive art is being co-opted and appropriated by art institutions, and how cultural workers can respond to this offensive and resist it. And we discussed how this organizing can include different tactics, such as refusal, boycott, and strike, but they can and should also include the creation of art for progressive and revolutionary purposes. And really need that the cultural workers also need to link up with revolutionary movements in order to be effective. That was kind of like the first round of workshops. And then there was a small break and a second session where people could pick again. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Yes, the next workshop was on Palestine. It was organized by Samidoun, and we heard from Hadil, who you can see on the screen, who gave a thorough report. Hadil is based on the ground in the West Bank. She spent several months in the Zionist prisons, and she's liberated now and was able to share with us a thorough report on the situation in the West Bank. Since the announcement of the 40-day ceasefire back in January, which is that there's been a huge intensification of activities of the occupation in the West Bank across the board. Freedom of movement is completely restricted. There are huge waves of arrest, and the situation in the prisons is horrendous. So in this context, in this workshop, we really discussed how we can continue our solidarity work here in the imperial core towards the Palestinian movement and the Palestinian resistance, while also here starting to face increasing repression. We know that 3 weeks ago, Palestine Action was branded a terrorist organization in the UK, and Samidoun has been targeted in similar ways. So that was kind of what we talked about in this workshop, and we're almost through it. The next slide, please. Yes, the sixth one was on military spending and social austerity measures, where we really observed that there are, first of all, there are social austerity measures happening across Europe, and they're also having similar impacts on budget cuts in education, health, pension, public transportation, and welfare services. And then, of course, always also talked about how the affected communities are organizing themselves against these austerity measures and fighting back, and that there's truly a need for more coordination and cooperation amongst the different movements within Europe. And then the last one was, if we can go to the next slide, yes, was on defying rising militarism and fascism in Europe and the world, which was organized by Resist US-led War and UNEC, the United Nations Anti-War Coalition. And this one talked about how the economic crisis caused by capitalism has led to more and more extreme suffering, and that in this context, the state is using fascist measures to attempt to stop the people from rising up and trying to undermine social movements so that the system can preserve itself. Fascism shows up in the laws that are passed and in the way that the state is isolating and persecuting workers, migrants, women, and students. But in this workshop, again, we also talked about people, people are still rising up. Workers continue to protest the cuts of their wages and the pensions. There's huge solidarity marches happening across the world in solidarity with Palestine, et cetera, et cetera. So that was kind of the situation and what is being done to resist the rise in fascism across the world that we talked about in this last workshop. So now you've got a quick feeling of what we talked about. Obviously, I wasn't able to go into the full detail, but again, the concrete resolutions of each workshop will be published on the website soon. As Andrea said, at the end of these workshops, there was a plenary session, again, where everybody was able to share what they talked about. And this is also why we called it, like a people's summit, because we're drawing on the knowledge and experiences of our own forces and from the different organizations that participated. And it wasn't just a day where everybody sat down and listened to one conference after another, but everybody had the opportunity to actively participate in this counter summit. And at the end, as Andrea said, we discussed and published a unity statement, which you also can see on the website. Maybe they're going to send it again in the chat. It's right on the website. If you scroll down just a little bit, it's right there. And if you go to the last slide, you can see, not the last slide, sorry, the next slide, not the last one, just the next one. Yes, you can see how, again, we ended with a strong sense of international solidarity and spirit of people's resistance and community singing moment, which is really, really lovely. And with that, we were ready and rested and full of energy for the next day of this weekend of mobilization against NATO. And then we can go to the next slide again. Yes, which was the protest. So yes, thank you, Mary, for sharing this unity statement. So we can move right next to the next slide immediately. Yes, okay, I'm gonna be talking about our amazing prop throughout this, because look at this prop. It was amazing, it was beautiful. Shout out to Balakbayan. They did a lot of work here to prepare all of these different prop materials. If we go to the next slide, we can see that before the protest started, there was a program of speakers, and our campaign was represented here by Azra Sayed. And you can see some quotes of what she said on the slides. First, about kind of the general situation. As mentioned earlier, this was also the morning where we woke up to the news of the Israeli intervention into Iran, which was a huge topic within the whole protest. On the next slide, you can see more clearly, sorry, I'm also looking at the slides myself. You can see clearly the Trojan horse, which was destroyed at the end of Azra's speech, which was really an amazing moment. You can see there's a video, I think, on the Instagram of Resist NATO where you can really see them rip it apart in slow-mo. So go watch that. And then the next few slides, I'm just going to talk throughout and you can just go through them one by one. There's some pictures and slogans that we used during the protest. I believe that we really visually, not like to toot our own horn too much, but we're really visually one of the strongest blocks, if not the strongest block, I believe. If you go to the next slide, you can just continue seeing it. We carried these like placards all throughout the protest. I know that there's like many media outlets that also took pictures and used the pictures of our protest to talk about, of our block, sorry, to talk about the whole protest. So yeah, it was really great vibes. I don't know for anybody else who was there, but I truly think there was an amazing energy throughout the protest. Okay, we lost my phone, but while we do that, I'm just going to continue talking on this. Yes, we are here to toot our horn. Exactly. It was amazing. It was so great. I was not able to speak for the few days after that because I was screaming so much. But yes, I think if we go to the next slide, we should almost be done with my part. Yes, again, I don't know who did this, but that must have been taking a lot of time. But you can see throughout the video, our different propaganda materials. And I think that is all for me. We can or we can finish watching the video and then go to the next slide.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Okay, we can go to the next slide. I'm sorry, this is like very messy. Okay, and that is it. The last great picture of our march. It really shows us in full splendor, in full force. And with that, I'm gonna give it back to the MC to finish us off about what is coming next, because this is obviously not the end of our mobilization.
Thank you very much, Angie, and thank you very much, Andrea. It was a successful People's Summit and mobilization. I'd like to point out that the unity statement is online, and tens of organizations who took part of the Resist NATO campaign in 2025 signed the unity statement. And the signatories are also in our website, which is shared on the chat box. But for the organizations, it's still not late. You could read the unity statement on the website and send an email and also be a signatory and also be part of the Resist NATO campaign, because this network will continue, because we have a lot of fights to give. We can go to the next slide. Yes, what is next? What is next for us? The working committees, subcommittees, steering committees, of course, after the event, after The Hague, make their assessment. And of course, also during these events, the committee members meet with the participants, and everybody was for the continuation of this network. We can go to the next slide. It's important to underline that Resist NATO is not an alliance or it's not a coalition. It is a network, and it's going to continue its way in that framework. And these are the few outcome and decisions come from the committees that how Resist NATO will continue. First of all, right now, it was decided that conducting an online evaluation survey to gather participants' feedback. This is the first step that is going to happen actually during these days. The survey will go to the all participants, organizations, and individuals, and get their feedback for not only the People's Summit and the mobilization in The Hague, but also all the building up events and the preparations. And after that, the most important thing is that it was the Resist NATO campaign is building an online network for information sharing, education, coordination, and support among network members. It is basically continuation of what we were doing for last 6 months in terms of education and coordination. But it is important for all the organizations from all around the world to know each other's struggles, because we know that the national liberation and struggle against imperialism is interconnected. And that is why Resist NATO campaign will continue to share the information and activities of its members between and also with the public. And how are we going to do that? We are going to maintain active online communication platforms to sustain the campaign's presence and visibility. We are not going to only use our online platforms for Resist NATO campaign, but also we are going to promote the network members' activities and their campaigns. That is of course, the format of being a network, because we have an important mission, and that is the next year. As it mentioned before by Andrea, there will be NATO summit next year again in Turkey, one of the most important member of the NATO, especially right now, what is happening in the Middle East. So we have a hard task to do, because we know the government in Turkey, and we know their attitude. So from now, we have 1 year, and we have to start the preparations. And all the network members are already putting their ideas on the table. And basically, this, along with sharing our own struggles and raising the international solidarity, the main task will be the preparation for the next year Turkey. When we talk about the sharing about the each other's campaigns and struggles, we could go to the next slide. And we have few campaigns and events that we would like to share, that the network members are shared with us. The first one is from the Guam. The event will be about no more Hiroshima, no more Nagasaki's. And this event will take place in 27th of July. And it will be in hybrid as well. There is a registration form I will share in the next slide. We could go to next slide, by the way, as well. Yes. Also, there is an important information about the Guam and IWA, International Women's Alliances. Next all-member meeting of the IWA to learn more about the IWA will happen in September. And the IWA and Guam are working together to place more pressure on parliamentarians and other stakeholders in the lead up to NATO next year. You could reach out to IWA and Guam for more details. And the website of the Guam is below the poster. And the second event is from the Resist US-led war movement. Again, of course, right now it is we are approaching August, and Hiroshima and Nagasaki is the important event that we would like to remember, and we should remember. And the Resist US-led war also organizing an event about resisting imperialist nuclear threats. And it is going to be also about Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It will take place in August 2nd, Saturday, and you could find information at the website resistusledwarmovement.com and register to this event. It will be an online event. And the third event will be from ILPS. And that's also, of course, about the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, remembering the bombings, fighting US imperialist aggression. You could go to ilps.info and get more information and also register these webinars. These are going to happen in the basically next weeks. We could go to the next slide. And another event is that ILPS Europe is building an assembly. The assembly of ILPS Europe will happen in Cyprus in November 7 to 11 this year. And from all over the Europe, and actually we'll have guests from all over the world will come to Cyprus and be part of the assembly, be part of the international activities, protest actions in Cyprus, a NATO-occupied island, island that 5 NATO powers are occupying and spreading terror to Palestine, to Yemen, and to Middle East from there. So all the Resist NATO campaign network members are welcome to join to the ILPS Europe Assembly. For more information, social media accounts are on the screen. Thank you for being with us today. There's a nice video from the protest. We should watch and hear actually the sound. But after this, we would like to ask you to open your camera and have a photo all together, a family photo, a Resist NATO 2025 campaign photo. I would like to ask the tech support, is it possible to hear the sound of the video? If not,
You might need to reshare and make sure your sound is shared electronically.
all right, we are gonna share this. This video is anyway on the social media of the Resist NATO. Everybody can see that over there. Maybe we could go to the photo part. Yes.